we're going to start with a bit of housekeeping. We have simultaneous translation for our webinar today, as our speakers will be contributing in both English and French. Please select the correct language channel by clicking on More at the bottom of the Zoom window, and then clicking on Interpretation and selecting English or French as required. We will have some French speakers, so our English speakers will also need to select the correct channel rather than staying in the main room. Pour nos collègues francophones, nous disposons aujourd'hui d'une traduction simultanée. Vous pouvez choisir la chaîne française en cliquant sur plus en bas de la fenêtre Zoom, puis en cliquant sur Interprétation et en sélectionnant Français. My name is Angie Dawson, and I'm the Director of Gender Equality and Social Inclusion for Resilience at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, IISD. I use she, her pronouns. It's my pleasure to moderate the session today. And we'd love to know who's joining us. So we invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat by sharing your name, your pronouns, your organization, and where you're joining us from. Before beginning this event, I want to acknowledge that IISD's headquarters in Canada are located on Indigenous land, specifically in Winnipeg on Treaty 1 territory, which is also the homeland of the Red River Métis people. We express our thanks to Indigenous peoples for their stewardship of these lands and waters. IISD is committed to building relationships and working in partnership with local First Nations and Métis communities, and advancing the inclusion of Indigenous peoples and respect for Indigenous rights in the work we do globally. I would like to note that we're recording the session today, and it will be posted on the IISD website after the event. Our event is planned for 60 minutes, and we have a great lineup of speakers. If you have any questions during the event or need any technical support, please use the chat, and our team will do their best to respond and assist you. Let's get started. So to kick us off, it's my pleasure to introduce Lisa Schipper, who is a professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Bonn and an IPCC author. It was a conversation with Lisa back at COP27 that sparked the idea for this project, and we've really enjoyed collaborating with her and making it a reality. Lisa, over to you for some brief opening remarks.
Thank you, Angie. And welcome, everybody. I'm really happy that we're here at this point. This has been a really exciting project. I guess I should start by saying that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is definitely seen as the authoritative voice on climate change, but it's really difficult to read. And I think that as an author, I can definitely admit that, and I think the other authors would agree. But the science is only relevant if it makes sense to the users, and especially those who are the most impacted by climate change. I was, I guess, lucky enough to be one of the coordinating lead authors for the chapter in which there was a gender box. And this gender box by Anja Prakash and lots of colleagues was a collaboration across working groups in the IPCC, although the main group of people were from working group 2. This was an exciting group of people who had a lot of knowledge on gender. And at COP27, when Angie and I discussed this idea, the IPCC authors decided to present this chapter, or this box, in more kind of not a traditional way. And so they decided to design a play. And through these role play action, actually demonstrate how climate change was affecting men, women, and children differently. And so I was sitting there and I was thinking, this actually is the best way to present this information. How could we translate this so that it becomes something a little bit more transportable? And that was this idea about having a comic was born. And when I started to talk to Angie, she was equally excited about the material and had already started collecting the knowledge on gender and climate change from the working group to report. So we basically thought, okay, this has to be done. And we were really lucky that IISD was able to support this as well. So I think that, yeah, I'm really hoping that's going to be a useful document and something that could serve as a model for how we can really put science into a usable format that can be used by all different kinds of groups, from the classroom to, I think, also for us scientists, because we also need to understand things better. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Lisa, and thanks for working with us on this project. It's been really exciting. So next, I'd like to introduce my colleague Cameron Hunter, who has been leading this project and doing a wonderful job. He'll provide a brief overview of the project and some of the key findings. Over to you, Cam.
Yeah, thanks so much, Angie, and thanks, Lisa, for your comments. I totally agree, and I think I'm going to touch on a lot of the points that you raised in the presentation today. So I think it's no surprise to all of us here on this call that effective adaptation really does require a whole of society approach. And that means that kind of a wide range of people need to be involved in our adaptation efforts and need the access to the best possible information and knowledge to kind of do these adaptation actions. And as Lisa said, the IPCC Working Group 2 report is really one of the most comprehensive resources that is available to us. And it includes an absolute wealth of knowledge on the importance of incorporating gender, equity, and justice consideration into our adaptation efforts. So the focus of this project really was about making this important information more accessible, more useful to a wider range of adaptation actors, with the hopes of ultimately driving the uptake of gender responsive and equitable approaches to adaptation. So our approach really was first to do a deep dive into the Working Group 2 report. We synthesized all of the key messages from this Working Group 2 report, first by extracting all of the references to a number of key concepts like gender, equality, human rights, participatory approaches, and then we grouped these based on their contents and their themes. And just to give you a background into the absolute vast amount of information related to this topic in the Working Group 2 report, the word gender was referenced in the report close to 700 times, and the word equity almost 400 times. So there is quite a bit of information scattered throughout the document. From all of these references, we crafted 11 key messages, and these are related to the differential vulnerability to the impacts of climate change that different groups within our society face, the benefits of more inclusive and equitable adaptation efforts, and some promising approaches to gender responsive and equitable adaptation. And I do want to acknowledge that we were very lucky to have two IPCC authors who were able to provide their time to review our key messages to make sure that they really reflected the contents of the IPCC report. So I just wanted to recognize and to thank both Deborah Lay and Edmund Toten for their assistance in reviewing our key messages. It really provided our project with a really strong foundation and ensured that these key messages were reflective of the contents of the IPCC report. Once we had crafted our key messages, we worked with the project's advisory group. So this was a group of advocates and practitioners that we gathered who work on the intersection of gender equality and climate change adaptation in Africa. And we worked with the advisory group to really unpack and interpret these key messages and ground them in the advisory group's personal and professional experiences of living and working in Africa. Using stories and other illustrated examples, we co-designed 2 different knowledge products that seek to make these important points from the Working Group 2 report more relevant and accessible. And so before we dive into the knowledge product today, I would just like to highlight a few of the key messages on gender, equity, and justice from the Working Group 2 report that I think are important. We often see recognition that women, children, people 65 and older, people living with disabilities, and others are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And indeed, the Working Group 2 report makes numerous mentions of these groups. But it also importantly highlights the social aspect of vulnerability and how the processes of marginalization and the exclusion of these groups is what contributes to these people's increased vulnerability. So it's not just the people who are more vulnerable, but it's the structures in place that make them more vulnerable. Apologies. Secondly, the Working Group 2 report really explores what some of the benefits of more inclusive and equitable adaptation can be. It's quite clear that for adaptation efforts to be considered effective, they will need to consider equity and justice. When we work to make our adaptation efforts more inclusive, we increase the likelihood of their success, and we have greater potential for more cost-effective and just outcomes. But the opposite is also true, that when we don't consider these things in our adaptation efforts, we are increasing the chance that adaptation will have maladaptive outcomes, which is something I think all of us want to avoid. Finally, I think the Working Group 2 report does a really good example of highlighting some promising approaches to making sure our adaptation efforts are equitable. Not only does this include the need for greater participation of vulnerable groups in adaptation processes, but the Working Group 2 report also showcases that many of our approaches that we've tried and true over the last 20-25 years, including community-based adaptation, gender and equity-based approaches to adaptation, are already contributing to positive gender, equity, and justice outcomes. So the focus of this project was really about taking this information from the IPCC report and really making it accessible and relevant to a wider range of adaptation actors, to just, as Lisa pointed out, the scientific and technical communities that the IPCC serves. So to translate this knowledge, we relied very heavily on our advisory group. And I'm excited to say that you'll get to hear from some of our members of the advisory group shortly. But before we do, I wanted to share with you the two knowledge products that we co-developed with this group. The first is a technical brief, which unpacks each of the key messages on gender, equity, and justice from the IPCC report. And it uses illustrative examples and stories to explain what these messages mean. The second is a narrative-driven comic that explores the topic through an illustrated story. The technical brief is intended to provide adaptation actors and others with the resources they need to make the case for gender, equity, and justice considerations to be included in their adaptation efforts. It relies on the illustrative examples that were brought forward by the advisory group members to ground and explain what these key messages mean and how they have been observed. The second product, which I am extremely excited to be able to share with you today, is a comic that takes a narrative approach to explore the topic. The comic tells the story of the impacts of climate change and the importance of inclusive adaptation efforts using a fictional location in Africa. The story is told through the lens of two young people, an Indigenous girl from a rural area and a boy who lives with his single mother in a peri-urban environment, to give context and life to this topic. Apologies. Now, you've already had a chance to see a number of the illustrations from the comic in the presentation today, but I wanted to share with you one more look here up on the screen. I also wanted to take a moment to recognize the comic's illustrator, Lulu Kidalolo, an illustrator and studio owner from Kenya. Through the comic, Lulu brought so much life and color to the stories and experiences the advisor group shared with us. They are an extremely talented illustrator, and I would really encourage you to explore Lulu's work. She was able to provide beautiful illustrations that explored some really important topics, like how an individual's identity influences their vulnerability to the impacts of climate change, how Indigenous people are impacted by climate change, and how Indigenous knowledge can ground and strengthen adaptation efforts. And what happens when we don't consider gender dimensions and other equity considerations in our adaptation actions, and how this can open the door for inequitable adaptation that doesn't center the needs of those most vulnerable. I would like to turn the webinar back over to Angie so that we can hear from our advisory group. But before I do, I would like to encourage you all to explore our 2 knowledge products. We hope that you find the illustrations, stories, and examples in these 2 pieces of work to be useful, and we hope that you can take them and apply them to your work in the future. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Cam. And I think the links to the knowledge products have been shared in the chat, so encourage people to check them out. And now it's my pleasure to welcome our panelists who all participated in the development of the technical brief and comic. I also want to recognize Joanita Bibirier and Marie Christina Colo, who weren't able to join the panel discussion today, but whose contributions we greatly appreciate. And I think, unfortunately, Paulette has not yet been able to join us. I'm just confirming that. So we're missing one of the panelists that we were hoping to have. Unfortunately, I'm guessing Colette is based in Chad, where there are very often internet difficulties. So I'm assuming that she may be experiencing some difficulties in signing in. So hopefully she'll be able to join us at some point, but we will get started with our other panelists. So first, I would like to ask you all to introduce yourselves, and we'll start with Chikondi. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your work on climate change as it relates to gender equity and justice?
Thank you so much, Angie. And it is an exciting moment to see the 2 products that we have been working on come to life. My name is Chikondi. I am the Southern Africa Advocacy Advisor. So my role involves working with partners, but also countries, including governments, in all issues climate change and ensuring that gender is integrated and not forgotten when it comes to decision making from the national, regional, including at the local level. I work really closely with great women groups, collectives, and farmers from across Southern Africa. And with CARE, our motto is, without gender, we cannot achieve climate justice. So it's a great pleasure to be here and to join the panel that's been working on this. Thank you so much, Angie.
Chikondi, thanks for being here. Next, Christine, can you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. And it's really great, as Chikondi said, to finally see this come to life. My name is Christine. I'm from Kenya. I'm the National Coordinator of the African Youth Initiative on Climate Change. And yeah, I'm a proud member of the YOUNGO. It's the UNFCCC Children and Youth Constituency, passionately advocating for climate action, climate justice, youth participation, and gender inclusion. I have worked in rural Kenya, empowering marginalized communities, women, youth, persons with disabilities, and Indigenous people and local communities as well to engage in governance, policy, decision-making on matters climate action. And as a young woman working in the intersection of climate change and gender equity in rural Kenya, my focus is majorly on amplifying the voices of the marginalized who are often excluded from decision-making processes through sharing information, training, capacity building, and mostly on adaptation, mitigation, as well as supporting them to do advocacy at the local level and bridging the information gap between the international conversation, the national conversation, and the local conversation. Yeah, just to ensure that inclusiveness is on practice in terms of policy processes, and they are prioritizing the most vulnerable people who often get the impacts of climate action. So my work involves grassroots efforts to integrate gender justice and into adaptation strategies as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine, and thanks for being here. And I'm thrilled to see that Colette has joined us. I will ask Manal first to introduce yourself, just to give Colette a minute to settle in. So over to you, Manal.
Yeah, hi. Hi everyone. It's so nice to be here. It's so nice to see everyone's faces after so long. And it's so nice to see all of the people that have joined and that are super excited about this publication. Probably not as excited as I am. But my name is Manal. I am from Morocco, and I am a climate advocate and gender activist as well. And throughout the past 8 years, I've been mostly focusing on climate action and empowering marginalized community. And it was only until the last 3 years that I realized that women are also among those marginalized communities. And we cannot, as Chikondi said, talk about climate justice without empowering women, specifically in the regions like ours in Africa, in which the system is just designed to exclude women from both the decision-making process, but also the solution implementation, etc., and everything that has to do with climate action. And so throughout my work, I am the founder of the Regional Moroccan Youth Governments Initiative, in which we empower young people to care about climate action at the regional level and national level in Morocco, while also focusing on these intersections between climate justice and gender, etc. And I'm also the North Africa focal point at the UNFCCC Women and Gender Constituency African Task Force. I will try to share the links with you in the chat so you can see, learn more about our advocacy. But I've been really happy to see that we as activists, we don't have to struggle anymore for resources such as this publication. And I'm really happy that we're able to share it with all of you.
Thanks for being here, Manal. Colette, would you like to introduce yourself, please? Colette, you're still on mute. Voila. Colette, we are not hearing you. I'll ask my team to just check in with you to see if we can sort that out and ensure you're on the French channel. Oh, do you want to try again? Okay, great.
Ok, vous m'écoutez maintenant? Ok. Je suis Colette Benouji, coordinatrice de l'ONG Lead Tchad. Mon ONG travaille pour l'action climatique et à l'intersection, nous œuvrons pour la biodiversité et aussi la gestion durable des terres. Personnellement, je mets l'accent sur le genre en faisant de recherches, donc je suis co-auteur et auteur de plusieurs études pour intégrer, par exemple, dans le plan d'adaptation le genre, et chez moi, pour influencer les politiques pour que ça soit beaucoup plus genre sensible. Je suis aussi les négociations genre dans le groupe WEDO, et voilà, donc particulièrement, je mets vraiment l'accent sur le genre et la résilience au changement climatique. Merci.
Thank you so much for being here, Colette. Great. So I have a few questions for our panel, and I'm going to come back to you, Chikondi, for the first one. So why do you think it's important that the evidence on gender equity and justice that the IPCC presents is made more accessible?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Angie. So I think at the start of the question, I would say the IPCC is meant for decision-making for the people that are impacted by climate change. And that means those that are probably disproportionately affected, but also those that do not have access to this science data. So when you look at the IPCC report, it's full of data, very scientific in nature, but all this science at the end of the day is supposed to translate into making people have informed decision making on what they should do when in the next few years. With the unpredictability of the extreme weather events that communities are faced with in Southern Africa and across the globe, really, having informed decision-making is a key factor in adapting, but also trying to cope with the impacts as they come. When it comes to the farming decisions, you need to know what's coming up. Are we having a short season or a longer season? So having IPCC be translated and make meaningful change to the people on the ground is very key. And that's why I was very excited to be on this assignment, really, because it made me also go back and think of how do we as practitioners take issues that are science might look complex to make sense to the people. So it really had a lot of introspection inside as well as we were doing this work. The second thing is we are talking of having inclusive decision-making, having inclusive climate spaces where everyone's voices are heard. So having this be able to be known to the people dismantles that power that is existing between those that are within the research sector and those that are living on the front lines of climate change. So really, this IPCC data, making it accessible, bridges that sort of gap that might be seen and has been seen over and over. And we are hoping that we see more and more of these initiatives where real science is making real changes in the lives of people. And I think the last thing is about justice and equity. Really, having access to information brings you power, but it also ensures that your actions are informed by fair and just decisions based on what you know. Those inequalities that are existing by those that cause climate change and those that are living with the impacts is sort of bridged because we are all now in the know of what it is that we are expecting to take place in the next few months or in the next few years. So it also helps to bridge collaboration and those siloed implementation aspects that are present within the climate space. So IPCC is serving the people, and this project has really helped us to take it to making it very practical. And I'm hoping it's not just within IPCC, but all science information. How do we make it real information for the people that are living on the front lines? So this is why it is important to make this evidence. It talks to equity, it talks of issues of power, and it also talks of issues of collaboration, and also making everyone have informed decision-making and not leaving it to a few. So I think that's why this is important and it needs to continue. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I'm going to ask Colette the same question. Why do you think it's important that this evidence on gender equity and justice from the IPCC is made more accessible? You're muted, Colette.
Oui, j'ai activé le son. En effet, nous sommes devant une urgence, nous sommes confrontés à une crise générale. Et quand tu vois le rapport GIEC avec 3000 pages, et quand tu vois comment les considérations genre sont élucidées dans ce rapport, et tu vois aussi comment essentiellement quand on parle de vulnérabilité, on fait aussi la relation avec le genre. Il est évident que nous devons faire connaître les preuves de ce rapport à une large public pour une très large adoption des réponses pour l'adaptation au changement climatique. Rendre accessible ce langage scientifique qui avant est destiné, par exemple, aux décideurs politiques ou à certaines élites. Mais ici et aujourd'hui, cette question n'est plus une question des décideurs politiques, ce n'est plus une question des élites, mais c'est une question collective, une question urgente. Et ça demande aussi une réponse collective et une réponse urgente. Et donc, pour moi, c'est vraiment quelque chose de très évident, de très réel, de transformer les preuves scientifiques en un langage compréhensible et en un mode d'action utilisable pour tout le monde. Donc, je crois que je rejoins vraiment ce que ma collègue a dit et c'est vraiment pour ça qu'on est fiers et digne de faire partie de ce travail. Merci.
Thanks so much. And I think it became very clear very quickly when we brought this group together that we had really brought together a group of like-minded people. And it was just really wonderful to see you all in dialogue and to learn from you. So my next question, I'm going to go first to Manal. So how would you like to see the comic and the technical brief being used? And what would it look like for us to be successful in getting these out into the world?
Yeah, hi. I think it's already successful. Like I'm seeing, for instance, the fact that there's so many people who are attending this webinar and very much interested and invested in knowing more about this publication. So I feel like I really appreciate all of you attending. And I really appreciate all of the momentum that IISD has created around this publication through social media, etc. And so I feel like we've already reached a milestone. And so I wanted to take the time to just appreciate the great work that everyone has done so far. But then other than that, I think that this impact and this momentum can still be scaled up because there's a lot of communities out there, either in Morocco, where I come from, or around the world who don't know that this publication exists and who are in need of such resources. I remember growing up in high school, I was very interested about climate change. And then whenever I would research it on the internet or try to see like some resources that were teenager friendly or, you know, they were just like friendly to someone who does not know anything about climate change or climate adaptation, to be specific, it was a hopeless quest because everything was either too technical or it was like not technical and or like so superficial. And I think having a mix of both, a story that is, you know, that hits you hard, that has a lot of like very important key messages, but at the same time is not too technical for you to understand, is like a very sweet spot that I think a lot of materials and resources fail to do. And so since I brought this example of education of me accessing these resources when I was in high school, I would love to see it used a lot in education. So for instance, I think it would be really great to reach out to various educators from across the African continent and share with them this resource and help them know as well the messages that are included in the resource in the comic. Because at first glance, you're like, you can deeply connect with the messages, with, you know, the messages about climate justice, about the need for climate adaptation, etc. But then after reading it for the first time, you're like, I know something is like so important, like this, I feel like this call for action, but I don't know what's the right words to put on it because a lot of people don't know what climate adaptation is. And so I think it would be nice to reach out to educators and teachers in schools. And a next step would be for them to either include this in their curriculum or in their teaching materials. And I think I would love to see young kids and teenagers and even university students like looking at this comic as like throughout their learning journey about climate change. So apart from education, I also see it used in advocacy. So throughout my work, I always struggle a lot to simplify a lot of the work that I do into simpler terms, especially when I want to like include audiences that know nothing about climate change or know about it, but it's just too abstract and too complicated. There's a lot of gatekeeping of a lot of technical terms. And so I see as well us as activists and advocates using this comic to share it with within our fellow advocacy communities, to share it with the policymakers, and to show them that, you know, to give them all of these messages in a much nicer, and simplified way. because I looked at the IPCC technical the summary for decision makers, and it has 50 pages, and I'm like, okay, you should read that, but at the same time, you can read this very nice few pages comic that is so nice and has a lot of nice colors and very cool messages. And then lastly, I also see it used for campaigning. I am a social media person. I use communications a lot. And I think that a lot of the social media content gets too technical sometimes. And this offers us, like us communications people, a way to campaign and share this on social media in a way that is not too technical. So I'm really excited. There's so much to do with both the comic and the technical brief. And I hope that we can, as community, as climate advocate community, we can make the most out of it and share it with as many people as possible.
Thanks, Manal. I am really happy to hear that you think we hit that sweet spot between the technical and the creative, and lots of great ideas there about how to get this out in the world. Christine, it'd be great to hear from you how you'd like to see this used and what would success look like.
Thank you for that, Manal, and thank you, Angie. To add on what Manal has said, in the rural areas in Kenya where I've worked with, there's so many people who don't have an idea or don't have information about certain things, even climate change itself. So I would like to see the comic book and the technical brief used mostly in terms of raising awareness and driving community-led climate action, particularly in like very rural areas, like in those of Kenya where I work with. The comic has really simplified the complex information from the IPCC report. It has a lot of pictorials, a lot of visuals, and that's one thing that the community understand. They have the visual awareness of it. So it's gonna be really good to have it being used in terms of raising awareness. Information and access is what's lacking mostly, especially in where I work. And information empowers individuals to make informed choices, policymakers to make effective decisions in terms of action. So if you don't have information, then you don't know why you're acting. You don't even know what do you want in terms of climate action, adaptation, or mitigation. So I really want it to be used in that way. And in terms of success, I think one would be like shared widely at the grassroots levels, in schools, among decision makers, because I first heard about the IPCC when I was doing my undergrad, and we had this session, environmental law, and that's why I had IPCC. But if we have continuous information sessions in schools, maybe integrated in the curriculum, even from like very early on in schools, then I think people would grow up knowing what IPCC is, what science informs advocacy and policy. And even in terms of language, it's in English now, but success would look for me like let's have it translated in different languages. In even our rural areas, like where we're coming from, we have like 42 languages. Can we also have that? Because when someone reads in their own language, then they understand properly. I'm trying to remember what Nelson Mandela said about, if you talk to a man in language he understands, then it goes to his head, and then if you talk to him in his own language, then it goes to his heart. So we did a COVID awareness back then, and we translated the COVID prevention key messages in different languages in Kenya, and it really got a lot of action because people understood what they were supposed to do. So if we do that, I think we will involve more people, and more people will become more aware, and then they would take action, effective action towards adaptation and inclusion in terms of climate action. And yeah, I think lastly, I'd envision the resources driving policy change, which is very key. Prioritizing vulnerable populations, which are normally left behind in so many spaces, so many conversations, because it bridges the gap between, you know, that information bridges that gap of inclusion, and the complex science simplified to very simple understanding of the complexity then enables people to engage, enables even those who are marginalized to understand what's going on and how they can act. So success would really look well like that, in terms of, let's just not have it in English. Can we also have it in Swahili even, or maybe my mother tongue in Kenya, because people get to understand their language, and this is working from experience. I go with translators who I can now talk English, and now they can talk to the people in their languages. So it gets to them, and they get to act on it very quickly than just having complex information in a different language. Yeah.
Thanks, Christine. Lots of great ideas there for next steps that we might explore for this work. Really appreciate that. So I have one last question, and I'm going to ask all of the panelists, and we'll start with Chikondi. What part of the comic speaks to you the most? And what's the message that it delivers that you really want people to take away?
Just for disclaimer, I love everything in the comic, but the page that really speaks to me is the comic where I see women's voice and leadership coming out. So this is where the community members are meeting, and the women are like, we have something to say. I think for me, that just represents what it is that we're speaking about when it comes to equity on the table of decision making when it comes to climate change. This is what we should be seeing more and more. So seeing that page for me highlights the hope that is there, but also the work that's cut out to really make sure that the results of IPCC are leading to this transformative change in the community, where there is a stark intro of the climate impacts happening, but then there is the voice aspect. The people are coming out, and they're coming as a collective together and speaking. For me, that's my favorite bit, if I should pick one. Otherwise, Angie, all of it, perfect. As Manal said, the color, everything is just perfect. And I cannot wait to share this with the millions of people that would be interested in seeing what this IPCC is for their daily lives, shown in a comic. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm glad I don't have to answer this question because it'd be very hard for me. I'll go next to Christine. What part speaks to you the most, and what's the message you want people to take away?
The part that speaks to me is where women realize, like it's like their head and their eyes open up, and they realize that, oh, you know, we have been excluded. That's where we try to hit the most, especially when working in the communities, is to open their eyes and realize that there's something that it could be better. And after realizing that, forming a collective and, you know, coming together and going to the public meetings and say that, you know, we have been excluded, we also have something to say. That part speaks to me the most, is the, you know, eye-opening. And, you know, they realize that they've lost their livelihoods, their children, access to education is not there anymore due to floods. They have no food as well due to floods. So they organized and demanded a voice. They were able to secure a space in the table. As all of us would say, we want a space on that table. That's what they got after realizing that there was a gap. And the depiction of women at the forefront of climate action is also very important to me and to the community at large. It's highlights the power and resilience that the communities, especially women, marginalized people, the young people, have in terms of driving solutions in their community. And, you know, just how having holistic mind, bringing people together, and the inclusivity benefits the entire community, because if you have solution for one part of the community, then you have done nothing. So it's really important that people are able to realize that there's a gap and they are able to act on it themselves and come up with a solution as a community.
Thanks so much, Christine. Manal, what's your favorite part and what's the message you wanted to deliver?
Yeah, I also have the same favorite part. I have two favorite parts to be different because otherwise I'll be like, oh well. But my favorite part is also about the same panel in which the women just gather. Because like for me personally, I've always considered the work that I do. I've always felt like I'm privileged because I'm able to, you know, work with all of these organizations and attend this panel with you and read this amazing comic. And I'm just thinking about all the women who are from my country and my continent who are not able to do that, and who are not able to express their needs and demands in the same way that we are doing right now. And looking at that panel, looking at just how these women really got that courage to break the cycle and like we're here and you better listen to us. I think that was really empowering because it takes a lot of courage to do that in a lot of communities, to just challenge the system quo and challenge like something that has been working for like many years and just be like, no, this has to change and we need to be part of it. I think it takes a lot of courage and I wanted to appreciate that and appreciate all of the women around the world who are doing this because it really takes like a lot of courage to do it. And I really love that, you know, the women were like, oh, these people are trying to exclude us, but no, like we're going to like bring seats and force ourselves into the table. And you can see the table like has extra seats. I'm like, where did the seats come from? But I'm glad that they brought the seats and they were like, no, we're forcing ourselves here and you better listen to us. So I really like love that badass attitude, and I hope I hope to see more of it, like in different climate action spaces. But then other than that, the other panel that I really liked was the one about climate adaptation. I think it's like something that I struggled with personally a lot is the whole fact, sometimes like the gatekeeping that happens within climate action, the whole notion of like, you cannot talk about climate adaptation unless like you have written a PhD thesis or you have a degree or you've engaged with this process for like 3, 4, or 4 years or unless you have expertise. And that's often wrong. You know, climate adaptation can look something as simple as what's listed in the comic, something as simple as, you know, gardening or building a roof. Like it doesn't have, it's not something extraordinary. And I think that communities can work together to just have climate adaptation solutions like on their own. And I think that was really inspiring because you have all of these people who probably have never studied, who have never like done a master's degree or anything about climate adaptation, and yet you see them like really getting like very good solutions that are specifically tailored to their context. And I think it's very beautiful. And I see that, you know, instead of just talking and the women just bringing the chairs and like chit-chatting, and also with the men, they decided to put all of that into concrete action, into an adaptation plan. And I really hope to see more of it. You know, it's challenging the notion that, you know, a plan doesn't have to be overcomplicated. It's just like a lot of measures that are needed immediately. And finally, this is the first like non-fiction comic that I read. I just read a lot of manga and a lot of like fiction comics, and I just thought that that's everything there is to comics. And I'm really excited that, you know, I can read comics, but also like that talk about climate change. And I hope to see more of this. So thank you so much for bringing this to life.
Thanks so much, and thanks for finding a second thing. We do appreciate it. Colette, same question to you. What part of the comic speaks to you most, and what's the message you want it to deliver?
Merci beaucoup, hein, et je crois que les autres ont vraiment dit tout, et c'est la réalité de cette bande dessinée qui n'est vraiment pas un travail abstrait, comique comme son nom, mais c'est vraiment du vécu. Et moi, en addition de ce que tous les autres ont dit, c'est que pendant qu'on faisait ce travail, j'avais une mission de terrain. Et lors de cette mission, tous les manguiers étaient asséchés par la sécheresse. Je crois que les Sahéliens s'en souviendront, cette année, on a eu un degré de chaleur vraiment inégalé qui a tué bêtes et qui a tué plantes, tout ce qui vit. Et donc, vers le sud de mon pays, le Tchad, c'est une zone où on produit beaucoup de manguiers et tout le long de la rue, on ne trouve que les arbres secs. Arrivé dans un village où c'était mon village natal, je suis partie visiter mon oncle qui a perdu justement 2 bœufs d'attelage. Et c'est ce qui était ressorti dans notre bande dessinée. Et donc, c'est vraiment la sécheresse qui a tué ces bœufs. Et donc, il se demandait comment il va faire pour cette année pour la culture. Mais tenez-vous bien, du sud, on est revenu vers le nord où c'était une zone avec les oisiens. Et donc, on peut voir que les oasis étaient desséchés complètement. Et les arbres, les palmiers dattiers étaient exactement comme les manguiers que j'avais vus. Les feuilles étaient complètement jaunes, secs. Et là, il y a une veuve qui est venue me dire, quand je faisais le focus group avec les femmes, pour me dire que qu'est-ce que nous allons faire, nous autres? Parce que c'est quand les gens qui sont bien, pour elles, les gens qui sont bien, c'est les femmes qui sont avec leur mari vivant, ont déjà beaucoup de problèmes. Comment nous allons faire? Et donc, vous voyez que c'est l'autre partie de la bande dessinée, la protection sociale de toutes ces communautés vulnérables. Et c'est ce qui paraît peut-être abstrait scientifique dans le rapport de GIEC, qui semble peut-être être très loin de la communauté, mais c'est du vécu en fait. Et maintenant, je pense à cette dame, parce que juste après la sécheresse cette année au Tchad, c'est l'inondation. Et en ce moment où je vous parle, il n'y a pas d'accès pour aller dans son oasis. Et donc, comment elle va, comment les gens peuvent lui porter des aides, c'est un problème. Et donc, la bande dessinée nous fait vivre la crise climatique, l'urgence, la priorité, la responsabilité des États aussi de chercher des réponses. Ce n'est vraiment pas quelque chose où il faut faire des plans, c'est urgent. Et donc, pour moi, cette bande dessinée, c'est une réalité parlante que nous devons vraiment vulgariser au niveau de tous, des élites, des décideurs. Tout à l'heure, Christine l'a dit, au niveau des écoles, dans l'éducation formelle et non formelle, pour que les gens sachent au moins que ce n'est pas l'affaire des scientifiques qui se regroupent pour écrire de tas de pages illisibles, mais c'est du vécu et nous l'avons traduit vraiment en vécu. Nous l'avons traduit pour le genre. Je suis sûre que les autres prendront cet exemple pour traduire les autres composantes de ce rapport GIEC concernant l'eau, concernant l'agriculture et pourquoi pas nous allons revenir pour faire d'autres bandes dessinées. Je pense que c'est vraiment un projet de survie, c'est un projet réfléchi. Donc, la partie sécheresse qui a tué les bétails, moi, je n'ai pas lu dans la bande dessinée, moi, je l'ai vécu. C'est ce que je veux juste partager en addition de ce que tout le monde a déjà dit. Je vous remercie.
Thanks so much, Colette, and thanks for really, bringing home the reality that we are trying to represent in the comic. So really appreciate you sharing those perspectives. So we're almost at the end. We did want to hear from you. So we have 2 ways to share your reactions with us. One is that we'd love to hear your takeaways from the session, anything that really stood out to you, either from the process of translating the findings from the IPCC or in the key messages themselves. Just drop your ideas in the chat. And then we also have a quick poll with 2 questions. So I'll ask my colleague Zara to get the poll up. So the first question is, how familiar are you with the IPCC's Working Group 2 report on impacts, vulnerability, and adaptation? You've got 4 options here. I've never opened it. I've read the technical summary or the summary for policymakers. I've read a few sections, or I've read it cover to cover. So just give a minute for people to respond. And then our second question is, how likely are you to use these tools to communicate the key findings of the IPCC on gender, equity, and justice? Very likely, somewhat likely, or not likely? Zara, people are seeing the results box, not the voting one. Can you just check that? All right, they might be having a small technical difficulty with the poll. So let's move into our closing remarks. It's my pleasure to introduce Mathilde Baud-Laurence, the head of climate change and nature at AFD, the Agence Française de Développement, who will provide us with some closing remarks. So over to you, Mathilde.
Sorry, because of the poll, I couldn't find the mic button, but I think I made it. So thank you for that. I'll be very brief because we are over time, and indeed, in fact, it's not so easy to talk after Colette's speech. And bringing the reality into this virtual panel, it's a very, of course, always very important. No, simply to say to thank everybody and to thank especially all the panelists, that because I understand that you've had a role also in this technical brief and in the comic in working on this, and what you've done together is inspiring. So asante sana, merci beaucoup, shukran, thank you very much. I'll stop there. That's very important for AFD. It was a pleasure and important as well to finance and support this work. AFD is, of course, convinced of the importance of bringing together gender and climate action. We agree that without gender, we cannot achieve climate justice, as was said. But from recognition of these two actions, there's a gap. And indeed, those type of support can help at all levels. So we do indeed take away the fact that it would be very useful to put this document and to make sure that it is socialized in many languages, but also in many countries. The link with the curriculum, which needs to be made, AdaptAction, our program, which has financed this work, is working and supporting the Senegal or Guinea on a different type of curriculum where this could be used. At our own financial institution level, it's also possible to use these documents, and especially the technical brief. Maybe talking a bit more the language of the financiers with whom we are working, and the various team. And I'm sure that it will be very useful for our colleagues to benefit from what has been included into this technical brief, because yes, indeed, we need to bring the gender discussion awareness into the preparation of all our adaptation and climate projects from the initiation of the discussion with our partners. And this work helps us to see how to do it better. So thank you again, and thank you for the very inspiring discussion.
Thanks so much, Mathilde. And we're really grateful for the support of AFD in this initiative. And especially I want to mention Christophe Buffet, who's accompanied us through the whole process. So thank you, Christophe. Just to finish off, I think, as a think tank, IISD is really strongly committed to evidence-based decision-making. And this matters at all levels, from locally led adaptation to national policies and in the international sphere. And the evidence presented by the IPCC is an essential resource for just and effective adaptation, and it needs to be used. This project, to me, really demonstrates the power of bringing people who are living and working in different contexts together to understand and interpret scientific information. And it highlights the need for more initiatives like this, where knowledge is being co-developed, co-produced to make sure that it's relevant and useful for those who need it. And I just want to say the IISD team has learned a ton, both from really absorbing the findings from the IPCC and especially from the process of working with our amazing advisory group and illustrator to package it in a creative and accessible way. We hope you'll find these products useful as you work to advance climate change adaptation in a way that's gender responsive and just. And thank you for joining us today.